Shall we start? So let's start. Excellencies, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our webinar entitled Inclusion in the Time of COVID-19, an international webinar addressing racism, discrimination, and inclusion. My name is Linda Tino Ledoirin. I am the coordinator of UNESCO's International Coalition of Inclusive Cities. This is a webinar series that aims to shed light on the visceral forms of discrimination, and it focuses on the social dimension of leaving no one behind during the pandemic situation. This is the 12th of the series, organized since April by the social and human sciences sector. Today's theme is addressing anti-Semitism, and we are happy to organize this special edition with the education sector of UNESCO. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has spurred another fast-spreading epidemic of hate speech and disinformation. And in the first months of the pandemic alone, the World Jewish Congress has recorded a 30% increase in anti-Semitic contents on social media. While anti-Semitism deeply affects the lives of Jewish communities and individuals, its negative effects are not limited to Jewish people alone, like all forms of intolerance and discrimination. Anti-Semitism has a profound impact on the whole of society, undermining democratic values and human rights. It is in this understanding that UNESCO addresses and prevents contemporary anti-Semitism within the framework of its program on the prevention of violent extremism and through the Global Citizenship Education Program, which seeks to build the resilience of young people to extremist ideologies and prejudice. We are pleased to welcome our distinguished panel of speakers. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Our moderator for today is Karel Frakapan, Program Specialist in the Education sector. Thank you, Karel, to you and to your team for co-organizing this webinar edition with us. But before giving the floor to our moderator, I would like to invite you to participate in our next edition entitled Health, the Hidden Violence of the Race, which is going to be held tomorrow, the 24th of June at 4 o'clock CEST. The information is available on the UNESCO website. And so without further ado, I would like to thank everyone for joining us, and I would like to give the floor to Karel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda. As you just mentioned, the ongoing context of pandemic appears to have led to a surge of anti-Semitic discourse, notably conspiracy theories related to the virus. Jews have been the target of conspiracy theories for centuries. They have been held responsible for various moments of crisis, including the outbreak of diseases, wars, or economic recession. Anti-Semitic sentiments and incidents exist around the world, regardless of the size and the presence of a Jewish population, with devastating impact. Violent extremist attacks in recent years have had a clear anti-Semitic motivation in Toulouse, in Brussels, in Paris, in Pittsburgh, in Copenhagen, in Halle, to name a few. A global survey conducted by the Anti-Defamation League in 2014 in 101 countries found that over 1 billion people worldwide harbor anti-Semitic attitudes. Studies have shown also that Jews are often the first target of hate crimes, though representing a very small proportion of the population. It's important, as Linda has just said, that to understand that anti-Semitism does not occur in isolation. It is the symptom of broader social and political problems, and it has a profound impact on the whole of society. It does pose a threat to the human rights of all. In this understanding, UNESCO has been working with the OSCE, Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, and with the World Jewish Congress to develop specific guidance and trainings for ministries of education on how to address anti-Semitism through education and in educational contexts. We have worked so far with ministries of about 60 countries in the world in all regions. Nonetheless, the COVID-19 pandemic and related outburst of hate speech calls for targeted efforts to address the destructive effect on the human rights of the various groups targeted in this period. To discuss the nature of the problem and possible measures to address it, UNESCO has gathered 4 experts on the issue. This session, as Linda has explained, will consist in a moderated discussion, which will last approximately 1 hour. The speakers will then answer some of your questions, which you can send us via the Q&A function. Due to the time limit, we will not be able to answer all of them, but we will try to make sure to convey the most important points raised by the audience. First, I would like to introduce Vanessa Ites from Chile. She is representing the World Jewish Congress. She engages with Jewish communities worldwide as a member of the World Jewish Congress Jewish Diplomatic Corps and is active in the New Generations program of the Latin American Jewish Congress. Vanessa is a lawyer, and she's the former president of the Jewish Student Federation in Chile. We have also with us Günther Jikeli, who holds the Arna B. Rosenfeld Professorship at the Institute for the Study of Contemporary Anti-Semitism, and who is an associate professor of Germanic studies at Indiana University. Günther is a historian and a sociologist, and one of the world's leading experts on the problem of contemporary anti-Semitism. In 2013, he was awarded the Raoul Wallenberg Prize in Human Rights and Holocaust Studies. Günther's academic work was also recognized in 2019 by the newspaper The Allgemeine as one of the top 100 people positively influencing Jewish life. We have also the pleasure of having with us Pamela Malevich, who is Under Secretary of Human Rights and Cultural Pluralism for the Autonomous City of Buenos Aires. Pamela was previously Chief of Cabinet of the Undersecretary and Chief of Cabinet of the General Direction of Institutional Relations for the government of the City of Buenos Aires. She has also worked in the private sector, including for the delegation of Argentinian Jewish Associations, DAIA. Buenos Aires is part of the international coalition of inclusive and sustainable cities that Linda just mentioned, which is a UNESCO network advocating for global solidarity and promoting inclusive urban development free of all forms of discrimination. We have also the honor to host Ahmed Shaid, who is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief. His mandate is to identify existing and emerging obstacles to the enjoyment of the right to freedom of religion or belief, and to present recommendations on ways and means to overcome these obstacles. In this respect, Ahmed Shaid is the author of a groundbreaking report on anti-Semitism, which was presented to the UN General Assembly in September 2019. Mr. Shaheed is also Deputy Director of the Human Rights Center at the University of Essex in the UK, and a Senior Fellow of the Raoul Wallenberg Human Rights Center in Canada. He has twice held the office of Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of the Maldives. Mr. Shaheed, I would like to start with you this discussion, please. In your capacity as UN Special Rapporteur, you recently released a series of statements regarding hatred and intolerance during the COVID-19 crisis. You said, for instance, and I quote, that the pandemic has caused a flare-up in existing religious intolerance in many countries. And you said also, I'm alarmed to see the upsurge in incitement to hatred, scapegoating religious and belief communities, including Christians, Jews, and Muslims for the spread of the virus. You also indicate that migrants, refugees, asylum seekers from different minority groups have been stigmatized. A few days ago, you also made a statement on the occasion of the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia. The situation appears to be really alarming. Can you tell us, generally speaking, how the COVID-19 pandemic may have affected minority groups, not only in terms of disinformation and hate speech, but also how policies related to the pandemic may have had consequences on the situation of certain groups?
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, UNESCO, for inviting me. I'm really happy to join such a distinguished group of experts for this session. Yes, I have issued a number of statements about the impact of the COVID pandemic on minorities, especially religious minorities. Obviously, as you note, we have all been saddened by the high infection rates and death rates in several minority communities, reflecting systemic inequalities that have made them more vulnerable to the pandemic, often due to the congested living conditions that make physical distancing or shielding of those who are most vulnerable difficult or impossible. Some communities have also have poor access to reliable public health information and also to healthcare as well. Beyond that, the general lockdown measures have also had a disproportionate impact on those who are poor or in vulnerable situations or otherwise marginalized, as minorities often are, including those who cannot take their work online or cannot afford to go online or have no access to go online, or would be exposed to more harassment if they did go online. About half of the world's population do not have access to the internet. Only 1 in 5 in least developed countries do. In all these contexts, minorities, including refugees and migrants, are among those who face the worst forms of exclusion. These are, of course, largely the result of existing inequalities rather than steps taken by anyone to target them directly. And we have seen a lot of that as well during the pandemic. There have been numerous reports of violence, discrimination, arbitrary denial of services, heightened exclusion, or other forms of disparate negative impact during the pandemic against minorities, including people of Asian descent, refugees, asylum seekers, migrants, and religious minorities, as well as other persons and groups exposed to stigma and or discrimination, such as the LGBTI people, indigenous peoples, as well as based on caste. And we have seen a proliferation of conspiracy theories and scapegoating, connecting the COVID pandemic with anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, anti-Christian, anti-Roma hatred, and so on. Part of this hatred has also been directed at communities that cherish or value collective worship and communal rituals, be they prayers or feasts or funerals. Obviously, limitations of public assembly were rightly seen as a necessary public health measure, but in some cases, the interference was disproportionate. Of course, some governments have done very well. I think we should note that as well, in responding to systemic inequalities as they became evident in the pandemic. I think Norway is a good example, where early reports that of high infection rates, sometimes high as 10 times the normal average among the Somali community, led to programs that reached out to them in languages and in formats that were more accessible to them and bringing down the infection rates. Around the world, also other countries have responded, from Italy to Greece, to Brazil, Bangladesh, to Tunisia and Sweden, have taken targeted measures to support disadvantaged minorities, from specific financial measures to food support measures to awareness raising and health information data that can help subsequent interventions. So overall, it's a pretty bleak picture, but I think some have learned to respond in a timely fashion to mitigate some of these measures, but obviously not far enough.
Thank you very much. I'd like to turn to Günther now and ask you, Günther, regarding anti-Semitism particularly, do we see noticeable differences since the beginning of the pandemic? Linda mentioned this report from the World Jewish Congress, which was really alarming and that indicated a clear growth of anti-Semitic discourses on social media in the first month of the crisis. If it is the case, why is the current situation particularly prone to the spread of anti-Semitic discourses? And I would have another question in relation to this. How does it manifest itself? Conspiracy theories, as Ahmed just said, who are the groups behind it? Is it state-sponsored, as we can see, for instance, when it comes to disinformation and junk news? Or is it violent extremist religious groups, radical right groups, etc.? Thank you. You should unmute, Günther. We can't hear you.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this very distinguished panel. And thank you, Carol, and thank you, Ahmed Shaid, for putting this all into context. I think this is very helpful to see this is a really problem that we're facing anti-Semitism, but there are also lots of forms of exclusion and discrimination against other minorities. So in the current pandemic, which is the one of the deepest crises now in our times, and we will only see consequences probably in the next months and years, we have seen an uptick in all sorts of discrimination, exclusion, and also anti-Semitism, and not only online, but also offline. So we have seen this report from the World Jewish Congress. We've seen other reports from the UK, for example, from the CST. And well, the way that anti-Semitism works is this is often a dormant feeling, a form of thinking that needs trigger events. And these kind of crises, world crises, that are really difficult to understand. I mean, we learn new things every day about the virus, doctors and politicians, and we all learn new things every day. We don't know actually a lot of things. So this is something that is very prone to anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that project things onto Jews. And we have a number of crises. We also, of course, have a migration crisis that has been badly handled. This is another thing that is one of these trigger events that people then project things, blame things onto Jews, and not wanting to solve problems, but projecting things and trying to see moving forces behind it. So this is not by coincidence that we see an uptick now, first on the online, very vicious anti-Semitic hate that we see there. This is mostly what we've seen in the reports that I know of from the extreme right, and interestingly, not organized or not in an organized form that we've known before. So before we have very organized fascist groups, neo-Nazi groups. Now this is inspired by neo-Nazi terrorists. And so, for example, the terrorists that were responsible for Christchurch or Pittsburgh, they have become heroes in certain chat rooms and inspiring others. And then we have memes using that and spreading this hate with very vicious hate. So we've seen that from the very extreme far right, but spreading in a way that is, and I think that's even more dangerous, not in an organized structure.
Thank you very much, Günther. Thank you for mentioning that the anti-Semitism functions in a way as a conspiracy theory. It is a conspiracy theory. We'll go more into depth in terms of the nature of anti-Semitism across history. But you pointed out also that it's not only a phenomenon online, but it's also offline. And indeed, in his report, Ahmed Shaid has clearly pointed out to a sharp increase of violent manifestations of anti-Semitism. Now, as a researcher, can you tell us a little bit more about the link between hate speech, including incitement online, and actual hate crimes, in reality, violent hate crimes? What are the correlations? The UN report, the UN Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech mentions, for instance, that there is a gap there in terms of research. We don't know how we go from online to actual violence. What is the research when it comes to anti-Semitism there?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is a major research project that we want to start hopefully this summer, that we look really into the correlations of that online and offline hate. It's not straightforward, but we've seen something that is already obvious from what we know, is that if there are offline hate crimes, then there is an online discussion about this, of course, and often this discussion is in extreme circles. Then there's positive reference to the offline hate crimes. For example, after the Pittsburgh terrorists shot 11 Jews praying in a synagogue, on Gap, where the terrorist was active, the social media platform, I went there to look what the discussion was on GAP about this event. So there were two main arguments. One argument was condemning the terrorist because he was just targeting elderly Jews and was ineffective. And the other argument was praising him because he did something. So this is clearly like a reaction online, and that then might lead to more violent attacks against Jews. And we've seen that even in earlier violent hate crimes. For example, in the shooting in Toulouse, where in 2012, 3 young children and one teacher were shot in a Jewish school in Toulouse. After the incident, we had, even in the United Kingdom, we had an uptick in anti-Semitic hate crimes. So this has somehow, it travels, and often travels over social media, where there's an exchange and people, some even glorify it, and then we see other people then taking that offline. And I think we have to more and more don't see that so much as a distinction between offline and online, because more and more people live, also part of their life is online. So we cannot dismiss anything that is, say, okay, this is only online. It has already an impact what's going on online. So we have campaigns and some campaigns targeting some people that have an effect, of course. So we have to think it together. But how that really works and how some organizations even then use social media, which has become the #1 tool for disseminating anti-Semitic hate, how they make use of it, we have to investigate further. There's a few studies that show that this is really an intentional use of social media platforms to spread the anti-Semitic propaganda. But you're right, there has to be more research in how that works, really how the networks do that and how they are connected on different platforms and so on.
Thank you, Günther. It's a very important point indeed. I would like to turn to Pamela Malevich and ask you, in the context of Argentina, how has the crisis impacted your country in terms of disinformation and hate speech? And you as a local a policymaker, as a politician, did you see a shift in the way people have engaged in this period, negatively and positively, and whether there were some groups in particular in the context of Argentina that were particularly targeted by hate speech, including, of course, the issue of anti-Semitism?
Okay, thanks a lot for the invitation. It is an honor for discussion, an issue that is central for the social cohesion of Buenos Aires City. On the topic of the nature of anti-Semitism and the impact of COVID-19, in its dissemination in Buenos Aires, I would like to mention first that Buenos Aires City has always been a multicultural city. One of our main values is diversity. Promoting inclusion is on the top of our agenda. We work actively in wide range matters, including remembrance, which I find central to address bias, perception, and prejudice. We work with the civil organization for the Jewish community, such as DAIA and AMIA, in the remembrance and the Holocaust and the attack to AMIA that killed 85 people in Buenos Aires. We also work on the remembrance of state terrorism and the Armenian genocide. Argentina recognized in its Article 16 of the National Constitution that all its inhabitants are equal before the law. Argentina has also signed International Convention of Human Rights, which established the duty of the state to promote human rights and fight against discrimination. In 1988, Argentina passed the law that commends Discriminator Act. This law increased penalty for any crime that is committed in persecution of race, religion, or nationality, and also establishes prison for those who participate in an organization that carried out organized propaganda with the ideas or theories of superiority of a group of people of a certain religions, ethnic origin or color, or ideas that promote racial or religious discrimination in any form. At the national level, we also have a plan against discrimination launched in 2005 and elaborated with the intervention of different civil organizations, including some of the Jewish community like DAIA. At the local level, Buenos Aires City has a modern constitution that establishes in Article 11 that all people have the same dignity and are equal before the law, and that the people has the right to be different without discrimination. As an example of how important the policy against discrimination is to the people who live in Buenos Aires, I would like to highlight the Anti-Discrimination Law passed by the legislative branch of the City of Buenos Aires in 2015. This law incorporated a very broad perspective and modern mechanisms to address and sanction discrimination. The law established a producer for the investigation of discrimination acts that considers how complex presenting a claim for someone who has faced discriminations can be. The law introduced the reversal of the burden of proof in the benefit of the person presenting the claim and the ability of organizations to promote civil or criminal actions. Another thing that to be highlighted about our anti-discrimination law is that the comment of the Discrimination Act does not need to be intended to be considered discriminatory. This specification in the law is very important since it enables response according to the effective or potential that match to people's rights. Since the COVID-19 pandemic began, we have seen misinformation spread throughout different platforms around the world. Argentina has not been an exception. We have seen and listened to a considerable amount of comments and conspiracy theories that link the sanitary crisis to the Jewish community. According to an annual report published by DAIA, a representative institution of Jewish community in Argentina, the cases of anti-Semitism in Argentina have doubled from 2017 to 2018, and 19% of the reported discrimination has made online. Considering that the pandemic has forced the government of Buenos Aires and many other jurisdictions in Argentina to lock down internet, and the online interaction has of course is rising. Considering the last report regarding anti-Semitism, we have to be deeply worried on how unsafe and threatening the online interaction may be. COVID-19 has shown, but also in some cases depending discrimination practices that specifically target groups on the basis of their religion, ethnicity, or their professions. According to a report presented by INADI, the National Institution Against Discrimination, during March and May, the neighborhood and social network were the space where the majority discrimination comments occurred, often followed by the spread of fake news or false news, which not only misinform but also generate fears and actions and opinions based on false data and facts.
Thank you. I think, Pamela, we will look into the responses in the rest of the discussion. Thank you for this panorama of the situation in Argentina. I would like to turn to Vanessa Ites. With young people spending more time online because of the educational disruption, for instance, in many countries, according to you as a youth leader, I would say, what are the new risks that young people face? And in your view, are young people sufficiently aware of their rights and responsibilities in this increasing digital world and in this crisis?
Hello, Karel. Thank you very much for having me. As you say, I come from Chile. I am part of the World Jewish Congress, but I will express my own opinion as a young voice in the Jewish leadership in my country. First of all, I would like to address this question from two viewpoints. People are spending more time online, and we have two issues. On the first hand, we have the privacy issue. We have to understand our generation as a very impatient generation. We are used to having everything one click away: groceries, information, even you can find a boyfriend or girlfriend one click online. So this is why we will always accept the terms and conditions and we will never read them. So we are not sufficiently aware where is our information going to, what are the uses they're going to give to our personal information. And we can see all this scandal in, for example, Cambridge Analytica and various other cases where we do not take sufficient responsibility to knowing and being aware of our rights online. And this can be very harmful. But on the other hand, I would like to address something more harmful even, that it's hate speech. I think that being online and having this computer as a shield between ourselves and reality gives us some kind of anonymity or protection against the real world, which encourages us to give a harmful opinion and not taking responsibility for it. This is why many times we will express an opinion online, we would not express in front of an audience in real life. So I think all this encourages us to express an opinion in a more light way, not bearing the real consequences we will have in real life. And I think all these factors may help us spread all these conspiracy theories that I really don't think COVID has spiked or created a new way of anti-Semitism, but it has just revived or made an excuse for old anti-Semitic ways or myths being told once more. So I think that we have to take a big responsibility, first of all, knowing our rights online, and second of all, really taking responsibility for the actions and our engagement online.
Thank you, Vanessa. It's a very important point, and we will look into that also more precisely when we come to solutions to address the issue of anti-Semitism, including online. I would like to turn again to Günther Yikeli and would like to focus now on the concept of anti-Semitism, so we really understand clearly what we're talking about and how it manifests itself today. Günther, how do you define anti-Semitism? We know it's a very complex phenomenon that mutates over time, and it has taken all sorts of shapes and forms since the genocide of the Jewish people took place. Ahmed Shaid provides attempts, I would say, to define also anti-Semitism in his report. He mentions, just to name a few, theologically based contempt, racial anti-Semitism, as in Nazi ideology. He mentions also conspiracy theories, which we've discussed earlier. He mentions Holocaust denial and distortion. He mentioned what some researchers call Israel-related anti-Semitism, when events in the Middle East are used as a pretext to express anti-Semitic prejudice or to perpetrate attacks against Jews. Can you clarify all this for us, please, Günther?
Yeah, I can try. I think there is a lot of challenges in trying to define anti-Semitism. I think if we really want to understand anti-Semitism, we have to take into consideration concepts of historical developments and also psychology. So what we have some useful tools. There is the working definition of anti-Semitism, IRA, so that It's the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance that has adopted this working definition in 2016, and now I think 25 governments have adopted this definition, and also other organizations, even like soccer clubs like I think Chelsea and some others are using that now because they had a problem with defining anti-Semitism. They saw that some of their fans shouted anti-Semitic things, and there was a debate: is that anti-Semitic? Is it not anti-Semitic? And so this working definition gives some examples, and it's useful. And then we have used it also in our research, and you can do it. I think it's a quick indication saying, okay, is this anti-Semitic? It's not anti-Semitic. But it's just a description. It's not really something comprehensive that leads to an understanding of what it really is, but gives an indication. And you can say, well, this is, or maybe not, or we can deal with that as a form of anti-Semitism. So there has been a lot of talk now about, in the recent weeks, I would say at least in the United States, and also many European countries, about systemic racism. And often it's a bit unclear what people mean by that. But what many people mean by that is that there's certain culture, certain history of racism that, in case of racism in Western societies, has at least a history of 500 years, but longer. But and that has led to a lot of things, even in the language, in culture, that is then can be seen as a form of racism or enforcing racist stereotypes. In the case of anti-Semitism, that has been even a longer history. We have 2,000 years, and even, I would say, even more forcefully, because it has come with a form of thinking of the world in what has been most important to people for hundreds of years, and that's religion. So it has been a part of Christian religion, but also Islamic religion, to think about things and to think about the minority of Jews. And it's even in the texts and the sacred texts. It's in there, it has become part of the culture, and that has even an influence now in secularized societies, how people think about certain problems and then project it onto Jews. So that is why I say it's no coincidence that people, and what Vanessa said very clearly, this is a kind of trigger moment. The pandemic can be used to voice anti-Semitism that was there anyway, right? And so what we see, like big themes, how around people voice anti-Semitism, we see in our research 3 big themes, and different groups of people, different kinds of people can use these themes. So one is migration, and fast changing societies. And then we have, this is mostly used from the right, certainly from the extreme right, seeing migration as a problem, and then blaming Jews for it. So very prominent theme is George Soros is responsible for immigration to United States and to European countries. So this idea that the Jews organized them, and so that's an old stereotype. The Jews are responsible for bringing our societies down. There's just this theme behind it. And then you have another theme that we've seen also, and that caters more to people who consider themselves of the left. They think that Jews or Israel is responsible for nationalism and racism. And so we have these themes, and that's sometimes emergent. And both of these things are often only on the margin. So not everyone who's conservative, of course, buys into these conspiracy theories blaming George Soros for migration. Like not everyone who's against migration is buying into this conspiracy. And so from people who are very much against racism, against nationalism, not all of them blame the Jews or Israel for nationalism and racism. But there are some. And so, of course, I mean, this has been going on for some decades now. So you all know that in 1975, there was this UN resolution saying Zionism is a form of racism, and that was revoked then after the fall, by the way, of the Soviet Union, who was one of the push factors for this revolution. But in 1991, that was revoked, and people realized, well, this is not true. But that has been still around and has caused some damage. So we see that even in today's anti-racist movements, that police violence in the United States is blamed somehow on Israel, right? So then we have this, and there are campaigns about it. So this is another theme. And then COVID is just a new theme that is very handy, I think, for many to say, well, with all this, the government, who frankly often do not really know what is the right policy. We have, I mean, a lot of different approaches to handle this COVID crisis. And who knows what is really the right approach? I mean, governments are trying things out, and they have to, because it's just a new virus. So people are unsure, they doubt the information they get in the news and the governments. And then those who are anyway thinking in anti-Semitic terms, wanting to blame things on Jews, thinking that there's a hidden hand behind all this, then it's just a very small step to blame Jews for this crisis, or saying Jews are profiteering, or Israel is profiteering from this crisis. So Israel is often just a code word for the Jews in the language of many people.
Thank you very much for this this clarification. I'd like to turn to Vanessa Ites, as a Jewish community activist and as a human rights advocate, and also as a Chilean. Can you tell us, based on what Günther has explained, the different triggers of anti-Semitism, how anti-Semitism is impacting the human rights of young Jewish people in your country? And beyond, in terms of security, of freedom of expression, rights to education, religious freedom, etc.
First of all, I don't like to talk only in terms of how anti-Semitism affects the Jewish community, but rather how discrimination and racism affects the community as a whole. Because we can see how anti-Semitism is a form of discrimination, which can be easily identified with the same discrimination other groups are having, or the same struggles other groups are having, or the right to determination other groups want. So I think racism and discrimination are like a growing thing everywhere. We can say that online discussions contribute to this. And also this thing that more and more people feel part of social movements and go like to social riots and feel part of a social cause without taking responsibility, not disguised only by our computers, but also disguised by the masses. And specifically in anti-Semitism, I can tell you a little bit my personal experience, how I experienced the BDS movement on campus. The BDS movement is a movement that wants to boycott, divest, and sanction everything related to Israel. So if we had an academic exchange program, cut it. If an Israeli teacher was coming to a university, they wouldn't let them in. Even if there was a cultural event, they wouldn't let them in the university. What is the problem? That this movement was disguised as an anti-Israel and not an anti-Jewish movement. But then we saw that when a friend of mine wanted to be part of the Socialist Party in the university, they wouldn't let him because he was Jewish and he wasn't Israeli or anything. So we can see how boycott, this is very interesting to like legally analyze, because boycott is a legitimate form of manifestation. I think we should boycott certain things, but where do you draw the line? What happens when this boycott is attempting against my freedom of speech. What happens when you are boycotting someone not based on their actions, but based on their ethnicity, religion, or nationality? I think this is like very harmful movement. This is a movement that is growing, and we can see how is one manifestation more of various forms of discrimination and racism that not only affects the Jewish community, but affects the community as a whole. That's why I think not only the Jewish community should take action, this is why I like very much this forum, but because it's not only a Jewish problem, it's a problem that affects the community as a whole.
Thank you, Vanessa, for mentioning these examples. The issue of boycott is something that Ahmed Shaid is mentioning clearly in his report, and indeed, as you said, legitimate speech should be protected. But I think Ahmed Shaid, that you mentioned also that the expression that draws on anti-Semitic tropes and stereotypes should be condemned, indeed, naturally. Thank you very much. I would like to turn now again to Pamela Malevich. And there is a very large Jewish community in Argentina, one of the largest in the world, but with a close connection of the history of the Second World War and of the Holocaust, notably due to the active presence of former Nazis in the region after the war, but also a very strong community of Holocaust survivors and Jewish refugees. You mentioned some measures that have been taken in the context of COVID to deal with discriminations and intolerance, but can you give us maybe a little overview of how the issue of anti-Semitism has been handled in the Argentinian context over the years, especially by the city of Buenos Aires? We know of a number of very good actions, which I think you can highlight for us.
We collaborate financially with the Anna Frank House and the Holocaust Museum of Buenos Aires, both private institutions. We collaborate with the work they do on creating awareness on the history of the Shoah and the repercussion in Argentina, with the aim of educating new generation and preserving memory. We also attend all the events they organize, and we also send them visit whenever we find an opportunity. Over the past years, the Holocaust Museums offered courses of part probation processes established by the Jews that considered that the people who had been condemned for their discriminatory acts or comments needed to reflect on what they have done. The aim of this space is to understand how discriminatory actions or comments harm people and how this, as a direct effect, restrict rights. We push and participate in activities proposed by civil society organizations that promote the values of the Jewish culture and religion, such as the Shabbos Project. We have a constant conversation on this matter with civil society organizations that represent the community to back them on their activities, such as the development of the annual report on anti-Semitism cases in Argentina, to generate awarenesses and the courses they offer to the public to prevent anti-Semitism. We articulate with the community and different areas of Buenos Aires city government to offer responses and information to the community. For example, when we receive information of graffitis with anti-Semitic content, we immediately act to erase them. We also celebrate Jewish festivities together with the Department of the Religious Affairs and with the remembrance of the explosion of the bomb that destroyed the headquarters of AMIA and left 85 dead. We have also published an e-books in remembrance of the victims of the Holocaust. That is available on our website to download and read in Spanish. The aim of this book is to offer information that enables people to understand the Shoah. We know that by the understanding of that, what happened, we are preventing anti-Semitism and promoting respect and tolerance so that we may consider it different to us. And finally, I would like also to mention that Thursday last week, the legislative power of the city passed a law with the actions to the definition of anti-Semitism approved by the International Alliance for Holocaust Remembrance. The accessions to definitions constitute a guide in order to determine what type of conduct is considered anti-Semitic and cannot be carried out in public life, in the media, in education institution, in work and religious setting. It is a tool to contribute to sanctions and elimination of behaviors and attitude based on hostility and prejudice, to reinforce prevention measures and to deepen the education of respect and plurality.
Thank you very much. And also, I want to thank you also for the work of Argentina in that respect. Argentina is a very, very active member of UNESCO's Latin American network on education about the Holocaust, through which we work in the region to address the issue of anti-Semitism, of course, and discriminations, and also, of course, the question of dealing with difficult or extremely violent pasts through education, naturally the Holocaust included. Thank you very much, Pamela Malevich. Ahmed Shaid, the United Nations Secretary General at a high-level event on addressing anti-Semitism through education, which was organized by UNESCO in 2018 during the UN General Assembly, said, and I quote, "Anti-Semitism threatens all people's human rights." And he said, "Where there is anti-Semitism, there is likely to be other forms of discriminatory ideologies and other forms of bias." And this is a point that you underline many times in your report, the fact that anti-Semitism sort of affects the society as a whole because it undermines democratic values. It's interesting when compared to the impression sometimes that we often heard and that we can notice also as experts and practitioners, that the indifference of the majority population is a major obstacle in combating anti-Semitism. We see, and I think this is not something we should put under the carpet, that often Jewish communities bear the burden of collecting evidence about anti-Semitism, of advocating about anti-Semitism, of remembering the Holocaust, of educating about it, and sometimes of ensuring their own protection. So I would say, I mean, two questions in this respect. It's often anti-Semitism characterized as the canary in the coal mine, and in a way, a warning of that there is more to come. Can you please elaborate on that? And also, in relation to that question, how does anti-Semitism intersect with other forms of prejudice, be it gender-based discriminations, racial discriminations, xenophobia? This is a point which you mentioned in your report as well.
Yeah, thank you, Carol, for that interesting question. In presenting my report to the UN last year, I began by highlighting that anti-Semitism is a canary in the coal mine. And the purpose of me saying that to the Assembly of almost 200 states was to stress just the point that anti-Semitic hatred is a global challenge that requires a global response, and that it is a challenge to not just to Jews, but to all of us. And therefore, as a way to defend democracy, defend human rights, defend our humanity, we must all respond to that. And earlier, when I spoke at the General Assembly in June last year, I was stressed that anti-Semitism, as I think Bernice has stressed, reflects a deep dysfunction of societies. One form of hatred, like you said, often transforms to another, as we've seen during the pandemic. Tropes, scapegoating of Jews quickly became a scapegoating of others, and it just went on from there. We also noticed that anti-Semitism throughout history has been a very light sleeper. It can be triggered very easily, and it's often triggered for things that are totally, if you like, unconnected to anything that Jews may have done or may be associated with or whatever. In any case, of course, anti-Semitism is not a rational thing. There is no way we can really explain it in any rational basis. So the best way is to highlight how toxic it is to everybody, and also the fact that anti-Semitism may begin with targeting Jews, but as history has shown us, it never ends with Jews. It consumes, inflames, I think, everybody. And therefore, there is a really urgent need for all of us to join together to combat anti-Semitism. Because what is the heart of anti-Semitism, as again Vanessa pointed out, is discrimination, is a rejection of the common humanity that all of us belong to. It's a form of racism as well as religious intolerance, but also a very unique form of hatred, in the sense that Jews can be seen as all-powerful, at the same time as being vulnerable to attack. In other words, the scapegoating happens because people perceive that you could attack Jews with impunity. So at one hand, they are painted as being all-powerful, same time as seen as people they can attack with impunity. And also, over centuries, as Gunter has pointed out, this has morphed and mutated and led on various strands at different times, and represents a collection of tropes, stereotypes, conspiracy theories, and scapegoating. But the heart of anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory, which is the very opposite of inclusion. Intersectionality occurs in a variety of ways, of course, as in a normal case of intersectionality. When you have Jewish communities facing multiple forms of discrimination, the anti-Semitic hatred and violence becomes worse. But there's also another type of intersectionality in this, and Gunter referred to this in part. Islamophobic actors can quickly turn on to become anti-Semites. The attacks in the US, for example, some of the attacks were to blame Jews for Muslim immigration or other forms of immigration. So hatred towards migrants, so xenophobia, again translates easily into an anti-Semitic, if you like, attack. So the growing hatred towards refugees, migrants, asylum seekers, and other minorities, add on to, can be easily transformed or can be added on to anti-Semitic hatred. And we see many violent crimes actually targeting this nexus, so to speak. So the intersectional dimension is a very, very important dimension. It's often at the heart of most violence we've seen recently.
Thank you very much, Ahmed Shaid. Let's now turn to responses to anti-Semitism and to solutions, if solutions exist. Not only to anti-Semitism, let's speak more generally also about hate speech, discriminations, and intolerance, generally speaking, and also maybe about the lesson learned from this ongoing crisis. I see we have a number of questions coming in about what to do now. I would like to ask Günther Yikili, what are these lessons learned? I mean, for you as a researcher in terms of disinformation and hate speech generally, but also looking at the particular issue, and Ahmed Shaid has just said it's a very unique phenomenon in that respect. What are your priorities? Not only in terms of research and monitoring, but also, and I see a number of questions about that, in terms of educational policies and practices.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is maybe the most important question for our panel now. What can we do about this? But it relates also, of course, to how do we understand it? And I'm very happy to see all panelists agreeing that anti-Semitism is something that affects not only Jews. And I think we have to stress this point and make it clear, because most people don't think of this as a problem also for non-Jews. So I think it's very important to stress this point, and it has at least two dimensions. One is, I think, at least those who want a democratic society, we don't want to live in a society that excludes and discriminates and hates Jews, because what kind of society is that? Right? And the second thing is what Ahmed has very well pointed out. At the core of anti-Semitism are these conspiracy theories. So conspiracy theories as such, so what people think of the world. We have a lot of people who believe in crazy things, and that's okay. But if they think about problems in very crazy ways and project these onto Jews, and then the solution is killing Jews, because this is behind them these conspiracy theories. If you think that COVID, this is the responsibility of the Jews, if you think that migration is bad and the responsibility is the Jews, then it's a consequence, logic consequence, that Bowers, the terrorists in Pittsburgh, and others do, and kill then Jews. So this is then of course targets for Jews, but it's also a kind of not discussing problems and trying to solve problems. So it's a completely fake attempt to solve problems. So that's why I'm saying that, because if we want to tackle this, so first of all, of course, we have to point out when we see anti-Semitism, and I see encouraging things in my research on social media. So I was surprised by the amount of people who pointed out some anti-Semitic speech and who discussed that on social media and saying, well, this is not okay, and this should not be tolerated. So that is something that we have in all kinds of circumstances, in our own environments. I think that's the most powerful, to say, well, we don't tolerate. That doesn't mean we put people into jail, but we say something about it, right? Not to tolerate it. I think that's the most important thing. And the other thing that is more long-term is, and what Vanessa pointed out, taking responsibility for things. Because this is something that if you take responsibility, and if you have the experience that if you take responsibility, if you do some things, things can change, well, then these conspiracy theories do not work, because conspiracy theories blame something far away where you cannot do anything about it other than like blowing everything up. And this, of course, is not a solution. So making the experience in education, but also in our societies, that if we take some actions that has an impact, and then things can change, even if they're little, and make people responsibility, individuals' responsibility, that's, I think, is the key long-term issue that we have to work on. But otherwise, not tolerating any forms of bigotry, frankly, and anti-Semitism is, of course, part of it.
Thank you very much, Günther, for this clarification and these suggestions also for policy action. I'd like to ask now Pamela Malevich about the measures that have been taken by the authorities in that respect, and in particular education authorities of Buenos Aires government to foster digital citizenship and to address hate speech, and in a way to try to minimize the risks affecting young people during the current crisis. So can you tell us a little bit more about how your government is doing to try to build the skills of young people for civic participation and engagement online in particular?
I already mentioned it, a lot of the work we have been doing before the pandemic, and how we were addressing the matter from an education perspective, considering the long term. To address specifically what is happening during the pandemic online and offline, we keep working on this program and measures, and we keep on close and constant contact with the community to address specific needs and listen to how they see the situation, so that we can offer an accurate response. We are coordinating, for example, meeting online with different networks of young people with the aim of creating space to reflect and remember the attack to headquarters of the AMIA. This meeting will be with a moderator, someone who is a survivor of the attack, and with someone who was rescued that day. In the near future, I believe we will redirect our effort to the online sphere, since it is in the virtual space where most of the discriminatory interactions occur. In this regard, I would like to highlight that we have to first keep working on the preventive stage with education. Second, identify these discriminatory comments online. And third, work on protocols that immediately erase them without impairing the right of the freedom of expressions. The responses to discrimination online have to be quick, since the online space enables a very fast dissemination of information that has direct effect on determining rights. We work with a non-government organization called Observatorio Web Observatory, which reports website with content that incite hatred and discrimination based on religions, nationality, ideology, political opinion, sexual orientation, social status, or physical characteristic. This work is highly valued because it highlights that just because you are online, it is not okay to say something that is discriminatory. Anonymity is a huge problem since people may feel they want to be responsible for what they say. They don't see how they affect the people on the other side of the screen. That is why I believe we have to keep working in coordination with the social media networks and online newspaper where discrimination comments appear, to implement mechanisms to first prevent this situation and then have a protocol to act when these comments are identified or reported. I would like to mention also some positive perspective that I have in regards to this issue and the pandemic. I believe COVID-19 has shown us that human beings are equal. The virus does not ask your religion, color of the skin, whether you study or where do you live. The virus ignores the privilege. People who may have privilege in some contexts are exposed to the virus in the same way everyone does. We all need to implement measures to protect us of getting the virus. We all need the same treatment and the same attention. I believe this gives society the possibility to contact and understand what other people may be feeling. They consider the situation of someone who is different and maybe having different needs. Thanks to this situation, some great solidarity has arisen. People have been very empathic towards their neighborhoods, people at work, school, or university, and being open to help and understand that others may be going through it out.
Thank you very much. It's important for everyone to understand that this holistic approach, I would say, we mentioned education and research with Günther, but it's very important to mention what you non-formal education, youth participation and engagement, engagement with local communities, as you said, also, as well as work with social media companies. That is, of course, paramount in that respect. In terms of youth participation, I'd like to turn once again to Vanessa Ites, because we understand that online engagement requires also a specific approach. And as a civil society leader, what would you recommend to help authorities encourage young people to engage more in favor of human rights, of respect, and the rule of law, to help shape the post-COVID-19 society in that respect? And maybe I have another question in that regard. Do you believe that young women and men's voices are actually heard from the authorities? You, as a youth leader, engaging with governments?
Well, first of all, I will still give my opinion as a young leader and from the viewpoint of my country. I think we're living very interesting times because we have been witnessing how every institution, how every hierarchy of power, not only in Chile but worldwide, is crumbling down. Like the idea we had of politics is crumbling down. The economical system we had is crumbling down. The educational system, I think we need a big change there. So I think the young generations do have a very important role in the reshaping of this new world order post-COVID. I do think we should keep engaging, and not in a coward way, as I said before, protected by our screens or disguised by the masses, but we should take an active role. we should give our opinion. I think we have an active and very important participation to give. I think like our whole educational system is not well focused. We have the same educational system we had in the 15th century, where there is one teacher replicating the information. And as I said before, we do have the information one click away. But what we need is to learn how to use these different resources that are available to us to distinguish between what is a conspiracy theory and what is real information, like to discriminate between good and bad information, useful and not useful information. And I do think this new reshaping of power and politics is taking in mind the voices of the new generations. And I do think we have an active role in the participation of that. We should give our opinions, as you said, in formal and non-formal education. And that, I do think this has been a very hard year for all in every aspect, but I do think things are gonna get better, and maybe this is an opportunity to reshape the world as we think we should. We're a very impatient generation. We want to change the world, but we want it now. So I think it's important to intersect the new generations with the old generations, maybe the old generations giving us the reason and the new generations giving the heart for the policy makings. And I do think better times are coming.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to Ahmed Shaid's report, which contains a wealth of not only information about the nature of anti-Semitism and its manifestations today, but also recommendations for member states, for governments, but also for civil society groups. Would you be able to summarize in a few words or to just outline some of your main recommendations in that respect?
Thank you, Carol. Yes, I make a number of recommendations aimed at states, civil society, educators, businesses, social media companies, and of course, UN itself. My primary recommendation to states is that they should do more to strengthen legal protections for Jewish communities, strengthen monitoring, data collection, and also response to anti-Semitic hate crimes and hate incidents. And also to do more work on awareness raising education, with a key recommendation to adopt in entirety the IRA working definition along with examples which are essential for people to understand when anti-Semitism might be, how it may be manifested. With regard to social media companies, I call upon them to implement the community standards and guidelines in a more transparent manner, and also to ensure that they also increase access to the complaints mechanism for those who are victims. On the education sector, I think that's where my most emphasis is on the importance of education, of a type of education which I call empathy-based education and peer-to-peer based learning. A lot of the Holocaust, lessons in schools are based upon presenting Jews as victims of the Holocaust and not really painting the full, if you like, Jewish experience as something to learn about, the rich contribution they have made, are making to our life, to our culture, to civilization. That's often not presented. So a much fuller, if you like, presentation of Jewish life, as well as more exchanges amongst youth, amongst interfaith communities, promote more exchange collaboration amongst them. At the UN level, I commend, of course, UNESCO's important work. Others have to catch up in this, including the UN Secretary General, enabling increased access to Jewish communities to his office. So to appoint a high-level focal point in his office to communicate with them. I think he's done that now. So there's been some progress, but by and large, the biggest thing I call upon everyone is to recognize that Jewish rights are human rights, and therefore we have to look at this problem as a human rights problem, because it engages duties and obligations upon states to protect, respect, and promote rights of Jewish communities as anybody else has as well. So the main call is for more, if you like, legal strengthening, as well as awareness raising, education, and engagement with the communities, all the communities, in support of combating anti-Semitism.
Thank you very much. So that's, so to say, the end of the discussion. I would now turn to you, speakers, with some questions from the audience, and there are many of them. So once again, there are lots of questions that we are not able to answer right now, but you will find some information on our website. I see questions notably regarding UNESCO's actions when it comes to dealing with racial discriminations, with anti-Semitism. We'll throw out some links to the chat room now to give you more details about our work. We've sort of clustered some questions, and there are some that are of interest to this discussion. And I would like to ask you, Ahmed Shaid. I see a question here. If the pandemic is global, why does anti-Semitism emerge in different ways? And we have other questions about also the how anti-Semitism manifests itself in other regions of the world than the ones that we've mentioned. Obviously, we've mentioned the ones where you have Jewish communities that are pretty sizable and that are immediate victims of anti-Semitism. But in your report, I mean, you've traveled a lot, and you've met a number of Jewish representatives and non-Jewish representatives. What is the situation globally? And in particular, I see there is a question about Asia Pacific, for instance.
Right, the first point, why does it manifest differently? I think an important point is remember that anti-Semitism isn't genetic. Nobody is born anti-Semite. It's nurture. So different cultures, different contexts will engage with that differently. Therefore, the different manifestations occur differently. We should never forget that. Asia Pacific isn't free from anti-Semitism. In some societies, you have a more visible Jewish presence, and therefore they could become targets of violent attack. Other societies may not have a Jewish presence at all, but they can be deeply anti-Semitic. The stereotypes, the tropes, the conspiracy theories, they travel all across the world. They're deeply embedded everywhere. I come from a country where there hasn't been a Jewish settlement, I suppose, ever, but I'm ashamed to say that my countrymen are deeply anti-Semitic. And I think this becomes more if they never have met a Jewish person. These stereotypes never dissolve if you haven't really met a person and worked with them. And in my report, I met communities from the Asia Pacific region, Jewish communities, and they conveyed to me concerns about rising anti-Semitic incidents and hatred, attacks on synagogues, attacks on persons. So it is a problem that's everywhere. We may have more in Western democracies, partly because I think we have bigger Jewish populations there, perhaps, and also because people can do more with regard to, I think, speech. Whereas also I should point out, Iran is neither Western nor democratic, but it's also deeply anti-Semitic. So really, these broad generalizations aren't very helpful. But the key things to remember, I think nobody is born anti-Semitic. We learn to become anti-Semitic, and we expose to environments which will foster them or dissolve them.
Thank you very much for this clarification. But then I have an next question, I would say, for Günther, that is to go a little bit more in depth of what you said, Ahmed. Are some societies more prone to anti-Semitism than others? Günther, you mentioned the history of anti-Semitism, in particular religious anti-Semitism. Maybe this is a clue.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I agree 100% with what Ahmed just said. I mean, this is really useful. And it's increasingly, our societies are getting increasingly more connected and global, so things travel. But still, people live locally, even if their mind and the connections are globally. But a lot of their experience is still locally and is shaped by the region and by also by the nation they live in. And this has a certain history, and attached to that history, certain forms of how people identify with that. So there's fascinating research, for example, saying when in some territories that are now Germany, in the Middle Ages, where there were a lot of pogroms against Jews, in these areas, we also saw during the Nazi period a lot of votes for the Nazi parties. So that is over centuries, there is proof that this has traveled, these very regional histories that have an impact on how people think. That doesn't mean you are born an anti-Semite or racist thinking, but it means that there is a transmission of these kind of things. So, and then it depends on how you, what is attached to this local, regional, national identity. And that can have very different forms over the world. And sometimes this is connected to certain views of Jews, right? The Jews are excluded from the nation or the issue. So that's why historically we can see that has shaped the way people think about Jews. And then it can be, as Ahmed said earlier, it's sleeping lightly and with a trigger can bubble up very easily. I think that is then, and we have to look at the different environments then, what is really specific and what is more global. So a very interesting development now is even the extreme nationalist right that want to keep the nations separated from each other. But there's an international movement of that. And you might remember last year in Halle, the terrorist attack by an extreme right terrorist. He spoke in English to his audience when he uploaded his video, and he spoke in English as like a German extreme right neo-Nazi nationalist. So this is fascinating how that goes then together with this international movement, taking things, inspiration from extreme right from other countries, but still wanting to be the German neo-Nazis, if you want, but not in the traditional sense. So things are, even there, changing. And we have a mixture of global, globalized anti-Semitism and then local influence.
Thank you very much, Günther, for this response. We're reaching the end of our webinar now, and so I would like to ask each one of you for maybe one final comment or a recommendation that you'd like the audience to take away from this webinar on addressing anti-Semitism. I will start with Pamela Malevich. Can you unmute your mic, please, Pamela?
I would like to thank UNESCO for the organization of this event, and of course, the audience to listen to us today. I believe these online events are very important. Society needs to engage and work together against discrimination. And thanks again, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Pamela, for participating. And I would like to ask Vanessa Ites for a last comment, please.
Well, I think ignorance plus fear makes the worst combo ever. This is why the Jewish community, and also I encourage other minorities to engage and show themselves to the people, because many times people hate you because they don't know you. And it's because what you said, anti-Semitism is taught. If they got the opportunity to know you, maybe they wouldn't hate you. So I think we have like an active responsibility as victims of 4,000 years of discrimination to actively engage not only in our community's issues, but also in other minorities. As I said, anti-Semitism is only a form of racism that doesn't affect the Jewish community, but affects the community as a whole. And I also think we have like a big role and a big responsibility to implement anti-hate speech or anti-violence laws in our country. I know that in Chile, it has been sitting in government for more than 2 years. And again, it's very complicated because where do you draw the line between freedom of expression and incitement of violence? But I think these are matters that need to be concrete, and we need to make them. And also include online. I saw a question here on the panel, like if there are laws online. I think there aren't. In my country, I'm talking. So I think we have like an active duty to implement those laws and also to show our community and encourage other minorities to work with us and show ourselves to the rest of the community. I think this is like the only way or measure you can really diminish anti-Semitism or any racism or discrimination.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Günther, the last recommendation?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I've been very encouraged, I have to say, by this conversation and in principle, Ahmed Shaid, by your report. I mean, this is really outstanding, and also by the many years now, Carol. I've known you for some years, and you have, and others at UNESCO have really pushed this, and also education about the Holocaust. That in some communities that have not talked about this, not thought about this before. I think this is really an encouraging development. And as we have pointed out in this panel here, the world is changing very quickly. And and with this pandemic, it's even changing more quickly than before. So we have to make sure that these changes, and there are always dangers in such a quick development, in such quick changes, that people do not follow that in a good way, and that sentiments just break loose and people get blamed, be it any minorities or with these conspiracies about Jews. And what to do about this? I saw one question in the chat that I want to address very briefly about artificial intelligence. That can be helpful if we want to do something about the massive data and massive anti-Semitic propaganda that is spread on social media. But I have to say we should be really careful about this, because only yesterday we got a message from YouTube that the lecture of Professor Rosenfeld, who's one of the most renowned scholars on anti-Semitism and literature of the Holocaust, that was banned from YouTube because they thought that was a hate video. You know, so that is, if you talk about this, and it's very difficult to detect that. We have been doing some research on it. We hope to continue that. We've got the funding for it, but very difficult for artificial intelligence to distinguish between those who are calling out hate and those who dissimulate hate. Right? So we should look into the cases, and that's really as a big task for our societies. We have always looked into the cases, and we need some human interaction, which is key. We cannot give it all away to some algorithms.
Thank you very much, Günther Yekili. Ahmed Shaid, the last word.
Right, thank you very much. My fellow panelists have spoken such, wise words today. I fully endorse them. And last point by Günther, I fully endorse that there must always be human in the loop in use of artificial intelligence. While it can contribute to our work on against hate speech, you have to be careful to use a plurality of options in dealing with it. In terms of summing up, I think, my final recommendation for all would be to follow the golden rule, and to engage, to dialogue, to collaborate, and to learn from each other as individuals and as civil society. I think we need to do more of that engagement. As Vanessa said, the more we engage, the more we address prejudice and stereotypes. For governments, call them to discharge their obligations to uphold the rule of law and for equal and fair treatment for all, and also to uphold the international human rights obligations. In very brief form, these are my, if you like, final recommendations and takeaways. Thank you.
Thanks to all. Thanks to our speakers, first of all, for their enlightening contributions to this discussion and for their continued commitment to addressing the problem of anti-Semitism and to upholding human rights. I want to thank also on behalf of UNESCO some of our partners with whom we're working on the issue. I mentioned earlier the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights of the OSCE. I want to thank very much the World Jewish Congress as well for supporting the organization of this seminar and for the excellent partnership we're enjoying, as well as I would like to also mention some other organizations working with UNESCO, the US Seashore Foundation, for instance, the US Holocaust Museum, Yad Vashem, and many others. I want to thank the audience also for their engagement. We've had lots and lots of very interesting questions. I hope that you will find missing information on all the questions we haven't been able to answer on our website. We've sent out some links on the chat right now. I hope they will be useful to you. So thank you all. This webinar is now over. Thanks for your attention.